This picture simply lists the needs that people have. They need water, they need food, they need books, they need access to financial tools like loans and savings opportunities. They need improved sanitation conditions. They need facilities where they can be educated. And they need buildings, and all the types of what I'll call, there we go, what I'll call things and stuff, right? There's things and there's stuff that people who are living in extreme poverty, they need in order to improve the quality of their lives. The question becomes, how are we helping people that live in these conditions to get the things and stuff that they need? And this is going to lead me into the first issue, which looks at a certain type of model. I'm going to start off by telling a story. There's a community called El Naranjo in Colombia, an organization, World Neighbors, great organization. Early on in the development of their organization, El Naranjo was one of the first communities they worked with, so they still had a learning curve to go through. And El Naranjo was a farming community in Colombia, and so World Neighbors quickly recognized, or quickly came to the conclusion that in order for us to be able to help these people, let's help them to farm better. And in order to help them to farm better, let's help them to farm better the way that we best know how. And so they brought in tractors and other farming equipment, and they were using this equipment with the community members, taught them how to use it and all that kind of stuff. And that year, that community produced more rice and made more money than they ever had before. So big thumbs up. They were able to really improve the agricultural conditions and therefore the livelihoods of people living in El Naranjo. The founder and the gentleman who was running this program, his name was Roland Bunch. And he came back a couple years later to be able to check on how the community was doing. Well, it just so happens that he found out that just a couple months after they left, the tractor broke down for basic maintenance reasons, and it never operated ever again. And it just turned into a big pile of rust. He found out that quickly after, their agricultural techniques went right back to the way they were before. And it became very apparent that no real value was added to the community. Now, Roland Bunch has gone on to really build a great organization, and through this experience, he's understands some important principles, one of which is that we have done nothing if nothing lasts. You know, he felt like he wasted a lot of time. He felt like he wasted a lot of money. And he's seen that there was no real long-term positive impact that had been created or initiated by the work that they'd done. He also came to understand another human principle. And that refers to where we believe change comes from. There's basically two different orientations here. If we believe that change comes from outside of us, like our environment or our circumstances are the things that really dictate how our experience is, then essentially we might say that that's a kind of like a victim mentality. This is very real, and a lot of people kind of live in this space. If we have an internal sense of where change comes from, it's kind of like a buck stops here mentality. That if we want to see something different in the world, then we're going to go out and we're going to do something different, so we're going to change our circumstances, our environment. Well, when we look deeper into these two different designations, we see people that have an external sense of change, we find them waiting for change. You might know them. They might be sitting on your couch right now in your house. Those people that have an internal sense of change, they believe that if the world's going to change, it's going to be because they're going to do something about it. And so they're out making change. Well, what Roland Bunch realized is that this community was like no other, or it was just like any other community. There's people with an internal sense of change, people with an external sense of change. But there was also a collective sense of this thing, where change comes from for our community. Well, before they were going about and they were farming and doing their thing, then what happens? Then a whole bunch of white people with a lot of money come into their community, bring them some equipment that they never would have been able to access themselves, help them to be able to spike their agricultural production. So they were able to observe that it was because of an outside source that came in and helped them to make this dramatic change. What happened when the white people left? Their agricultural, the stuff broke, and the agricultural production went right back to where it was before. They blamed themselves for this. In fact, Roland Bunch knew that because the community asked him to come back and help to do work again, and he was totally confused because it was clear that what he'd done had never produced any positive impact in the long term. But he realized that they believed that it was through them that they were able to find progress and development. And so he came to understand that what had happened really at the internal level was the community had started to believe less and less in their ability to enact their own positive change for themselves and their communities. And they became emotionally and mentally more dependent upon outside institutions. As I've traveled all over the world, I've seen this handout mentality very, very real. And it's not a dispositional thing. It doesn't mean that people that live in developed countries or that live in poverty have this natural tendency to ask us for stuff. But the way that we as a Western international development industry, if you'll say, has interacted with them over the last 20 or 30 years is it's just classical conditioning. We've conditioned them to believe and understand that when we show up, we're going to give them something. So then, naturally, and we would if we were in their circumstances, they've learned to, the more they ask for, the more they might get. And so that's the relationship that we experience right when we pull up to a community. Oftentimes, at least I have. And so I call this kind of the broken pencil syndrome, meaning that we can have all the ingredients to effective development work really, really kind of close, but if they're misaligned a little bit, then our efforts in poverty reduction may not really be able to have any impact at all in the same way that Roland Bunch said. If nothing lasts, then we haven't done anything. What I call this model is a model that's focused on the development of things and stuff. So we, in all of our development programs, we have this tendency to want to build things and give stuff away for people and hope that is going to be able to solve the problem. We hope that the things and stuff that we're able to create are then able to meet the needs of people. And this is totally normal. This is one of the major things that I would like to see us start to have conversations around shifting. We've seen over and over again that mosquito nets may never get used, that wells or irrigation systems may break, the valves might go out, or any number of other things. They may never have any long-term positive impact. That food aid, it might solve a short-term problem and create a long-term dependency. That we might go with an intention of building a school building to educate children, but all we really did was build 4 walls and a roof, and it never actually resulted in really any substantial education of children. I can't tell you how many abandoned orphanage buildings or abandoned school buildings I've seen that were created by an NGO that just came in to be able to build a project, but didn't result in really empowering the people. So when our development efforts are strictly focused on giving things away, or strictly focused on nothing more than just building things for people, then essentially we're looking at a stuff-centered model, where we want to be able to bring in something or do something or build something, and we're rolling the dice. We're hoping that this thing is going to really meet the needs that people have. And from my experience, I've seen it to be not as effective of a model. I spent time in a number of different areas of Kenya. This particular summer, I was asked to work with community leaders in northern Kenya, in an area called Turkana. And it was really, I loved it. I loved to be able to work with community leaders and train them on community development, best practices, and most effective ways for them to be able to empower their community members to be able to create positive change. Well, while I was there, I came across these atrocious bright blue porta potties. And to me, it was like this classic things and stuff model, where, and I got the story, what had happened was an organization came into the community, they saw the community was defecating openly. So there wasn't any rhyme or reason, and people were just openly defecating. That caused sanitation hazards. People were getting diseases just like the one I talked about with Jacoby. So their solution to solving this problem was to import these porta potties, probably from China or something like that, and then place them all throughout the community. Well, it didn't take very long to be able to see open defecation everywhere, even the fact that these porta potties had been installed for over a year. And it wasn't an isolated situation. There was defecation all over the community. This was almost like a landmine of open defecation, almost like blockaded you from even being able to get to this porta potty. So we saw that things in this situation didn't quite go as well as planned. Okay? There was obviously no real behavioral change. So yes, we did bring in things and stuff, and we assumed that things and that stuff would solve the needs of the people. But in this situation, they were wrong. And it didn't result in any real human empowerment. So the same exact sanitation hazards existed after as did before, even though this organization spent a ton of time and a ton of money. And oftentimes, even if the things and stuff works really great, most stuff has an expiration date. And it's very, very difficult for stuff to be able to last indefinitely. And then sometimes we cause actually some real major problems. And one of the things that we see is undermining local markets. Now this is something that does happen on a pretty regular basis in development efforts, where we go in to be able to bring in livestock to a community, or bring in food aid to a community. But in those programs where there's a community that might have 20 cows and might have some market equilibrium where these dairy farmers, they take care of their cows and they sell the milk to their community members. Well, if we come in and we say, oh, poor community, let's give them 20 new cows, we actually really altered the marketplace for those people that had a livelihood based upon selling milk to their community members, because the price of milk dropped in half. When we come in and we give food away, we give cereals and grains away, we find that community members work all year long to prepare a harvest and to go harvest grain, and just before they're able to sell that to their community members, an NGO rolls up with bags of wheat or bags of corn. And we undermine the local businesses of those farmers. And we can put dairy farmers or agriculturalists or others out of business if we aren't fully aware from a holistic perspective of how different ramifications our development efforts could have. So what we find, let's get a little bit off here. What we find is that this type of work can actually reinforce, as I was telling the story about the Ronco, this external sense of control, where we can leave people waiting for change. We can leave people expecting things. I was having a conversation last night with a gentleman who's in this room who was talking about they came in, and when they showed up, the community expected them to be able to give them this, that, and the other thing. Where did those expectations come from? It came from other projects that other NGOs had done in other neighboring communities, and when they went over there, they saw something shiny, and they said, oh, I want white people to come and give us that thing too. And so now there's an expectation, and we've reinforced this handout mentality, because why would a person invest their own time, energy, and resources to be able to build or create something for themselves if they believe that somebody else can do it for them, or is going to come and do it and cover the majority of the cost of doing that? You know, societies have developed and evolved in a very standard way for most of the history of mankind. And that is that we've used our creativity and the resources we have around us to be able to solve our problems. That's really exactly what happened in the evolution of American societal conditions over the last 300 or 400 years. We had a problem, we figured out what resources we had to solve that problem, and we did a pretty good job of solving those problems. And there's some societies that are a couple hundred years behind us, literally, for a number of different reasons. And the conversation really needs to revolve around trying to help to support that societal development rather than undermining it by coming in and giving away or building just things and stuff for people that puts them on their heels and can demotivate them from solving their own problems. So this is the stuff-centered approach. And this is the first major problem that I see in many of the orientation of our development efforts worldwide, that hundreds of organizations are falling into some of these pitfalls. And it's not to say that things and stuff are bad. It's not what I'm saying at all. I know that many of you have worked so hard and given so much and spent so much time to be able to create things and stuff for people. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. What I'm saying is when we put all of our energy into the stuff and we don't have equal or more energy in the development of people as we're involved with that stuff, then we're going to miss the mark. Second problem, and that is what is the role of the volunteer in this equation? What role does a volunteer really have, an outsider, to be able to interact with the community and to feel that they have a role in helping to empower people? Well, I believe that there is a very important role, and unfortunately, a lot of this industry that we're a part of has undermined maybe what might be the best. And the role that's been created for many organizations is putting the volunteer at the center of the equation. So organizations might want their volunteers to be able to have a perfect experience. They entice people to come and be a part of volunteer tourism opportunities. And then the way the programs are designed revolves around making sure that volunteers can have the types of experiences they would like to have. I've talked to people that are closely related to programs like these. And I've talked about the idea of education and training. And what I've had somebody tell me straight up is that volunteers don't want to be a part of training or monitoring programs, they want to be building something. So we need to really ask ourselves, is the nature of the work that we're doing more about what makes us feel good, what's really cool, what makes it a great picture that we can put on our wall, or are we really oriented strictly and with discipline towards the absolute best needs of the community? Because if we're not, we're going to find that the community needs are going to end up on the periphery, and we're going to orient our programs to be able to do the types of things that we want to do. It's a natural pitfall. Many people fall into it. And it has negative ramifications for both the community and the volunteers. I've talked to probably hundreds of volunteers that have been a part of these types of programs. The marketing messages really captured them. But when they got overseas, they didn't feel that they were making a real valuable long-term impact in the community. And they felt like the whole experience had been created so that they could feel like they did something important. Well, this actually really deteriorates people's experiences because now they have a little bit of a moral dilemma that was that investment of energy really the best thing that I could have done with my time and energy. And what it can do for volunteers is it can actually demotivate volunteers from getting involved in future opportunities for service. And so that might leave more people looking for change. So this is the volunteer-centered issue. And as I mentioned before, I believe that these are the two major issues that we are all facing as an international development or volunteer tourism body. And again, there's 2 million of us. There's a huge army out there. Now, there's some pretty cool news. And that is that while there is these two pretty big systemic issues, there's one solution. Both of these things can be solved by one simple concept. You guys want to know what that is? That is to put humans, the human beings that we desire to love and to serve, at the very center of the conversation. So that rather than too many conversations around just developing things and stuff and giving things away and building stuff for us, for people, the heart of the conversation is empowering people. It's connecting people. It's serving people. It's educating people. It's making sure that people are left behind with more information and more skills and are better equipped to be able to solve their problems in the future even after you left than they were before. And that when we develop our programs, we make sure that what's absolutely best for the community members is the center of our program design. And that the moment that we feel like, well, this might not be the best solution, then we extract that from possibility because we become disciplined, that our program designs are going to revolve around nothing else but what's best for the community. And then if we don't have the time or the budget or the resources to do the thing that's going to be best for the community, and there might be some potential negative ramifications with our present model, then we wipe it off the table without ego or without any other attachment. Because we put human beings at the absolute center of the development conversation. And this type of approach is called human-centered development. So, to tell you a little more about human-centered development, I'll tell you another story. This was in Vietnam. There's a gentleman named Jerry Stern that works with Save the Children, And they were invited to be able to go into Vietnam to help them to deal with the malnutrition issue. Now, the thing that's really cool about the story is that Vietnam was really hesitant to allow NGOs into their country because they'd seen that NGOs in the past had caused lots of problems. Save the Children was given a special opportunity because this malnutrition issue was really bad. So they had 6 months to be able to really show that they were able to make meaningful impact. So Jerry Stern basically had a choice. He'd go the traditional model, which is the things and stuff model, and go in and figure out what the malnutrition issue really was, and come up with some perfect formula that they could feed the children, have it manufactured and packaged in China, and then shipped down to Vietnam, and then figure out a distribution strategy so they could nourish the children. But I'm really happy to report that Jerry decided to go the route of empowering people versus this things and stuff model. Let me tell you what he did. Jerry started out by really leveling with people, getting where they're at, find out what their needs and interests are. He called together the women because they were the ones who cared the most about this issue. And he empowered them to actually do self-observation or self-analysis of their community. He taught them how to go out and monitor the state of malnutrition of all the children in the community. He taught them how to do that, focus on empowering people, sent them out in the community, and have them come back the next day and report what they found. They did this, and they came back and reported the next day. Jerry had one question for them. He said, were there any of the poorest families that had children that were not malnourished? They looked at their information and which was in Vietnam, was yes. So they identified that there were some children that weren't malnourished, but came from the poorest families. What did he learn in that? He learned that there were some things that some community members were doing differently to help their children to be healthy that others weren't doing. So he went to those families, and he he investigated what they were doing differently. He called them the bright spots. So what were the bright spots doing that the rest weren't? And he identified 3 things. The first thing had to do with portions. It was really common to be able to feed 2 meals a day to your family. But these bright spot families, they had the same amount of food, but they fed 4 portions rather than 2. They broke it up. And what happened was they realized through the study that malnourished kids did a better job of digesting smaller portions more frequently than larger portions more spread out. Pretty simple, but the kids were getting more nourishment. There was also an attention issue, that most families just put all the food on one platter and expected that everyone in the family would get as much as they needed. So the little 2-year-olds were competing with the older siblings and with the father to be able to get adequate portions. Well, in these bright spots, all the mothers were doing was separating food for the younger children so they didn't have to compete with their brothers and sisters. And third, they identified free supplements. So these mothers, they were chopping up the greens from the sweet potatoes and they were throwing them in the meals. They were pulling out little shrimp and other bugs from the environment and throwing those in the meals. So the kids had extra sources of vitamins and minerals and protein that the other kids weren't having. Basically, what he identified was that every community member could help to be able to massively decrease the malnutrition of their children by doing things differently. They didn't need to come in and start a new program or give something away or fabricate a new formula. They just needed to share some things that were working in other places with the rest of them. So what Jerry did was he identified where these bright spots were. Rather than just broadcasting this information, he helped to be able to get the women who were doing a great job taking care of their families and help them to show the other community members, so the message came from the community and not from the outside, on how they could be able to improve their cooking to help their kids to be healthier. And he promoted these powerful ideas by showing. And he was able to make dramatic impact in helping to reduce malnutrition in the area, in the whole area, because he focused on developing people, a way that was totally sustainable. It was able to spread exponentially. There was a very small budget associated with it, and it had a huge impact. So when we want to position ourselves to support a community and to become empowered, there's just 3 things you have to remember. The first is we want to help them to identify their own problem. I know that you guys are great at this. You have assessments that you do on the front end of any program implementation, and we can always do better at really being good and skilled at helping people and acting as a facilitator to help them to identify their own problems. The second thing is that we help them to be able to discover their own solutions. Again, this also takes skills in facilitation to help people to be able to work themselves down through a questioning process to help them to get to a point where they've identified their own problems and discovered their own solutions. And lastly, that we support people to implement those solutions with their own available resources. This is something that I personally believe, and this is exactly how Jerry Sturgeon did it in Vietnam, is he helped people to solve their own problems by mobilizing what was already available. So it didn't create any dependency or didn't shift anyone's belief in where control comes from. Basically what I'm saying is this is a difference between an approach where we are doing versus where we are supporting others to do. I think that we've all had professors that really lectured at us and told us what to do, and we didn't feel very empowered. And then we had other professors that just asked us the right question at the right time that allowed us to be able to do the mental work to solve the problem, and we felt great about ourselves. And so what if we became more effective and more disciplined and more capable of moving away from the model where we do things for people and enhancing our ability to be able to support other people to do? What does this look like? As I mentioned, it looks like facilitation. So we become experts at asking people the right questions at the right time. It looks like education, so we become better at providing information. That information that can live with people forever. We help to provide training so that people can get the skills that they're going to need. And we support people in getting connected so that community members can connect to each other, communities can connect with each other, community leaders can start talking to each other, so we can start moving through the system and allowing these bright spots, like in the story of Vietnam, to become more commonplace and to spread throughout communities. When we do this, it results in real empowerment. And what is real empowerment? It's when we set people up so that they can achieve on their own, completely. So as a result of our interaction with them, they become better at identifying their own problems, discovering their own solutions, implementing those solutions with their own available resources. They become better at believing in their own capacity to bring about positive change, and that they're able to carry that with them throughout the remainder of the development needs their community has. Ultimately, it means that the information, the skills, the leadership abilities, and the organizational capacities are able to be implanted or embodied by the community members. So that now they hold those things, and now they're more capable of going out in the future and meeting their own needs. Essentially, when we do this model, we support people to shift the paradigm where they actually enhance their ability to believe that they can make positive change. And it's very, very exciting to see when somebody's had this psychological shift, because they get fired up. And they look all throughout the community for other problems that they can now solve, because they now see themselves as the type of person that's capable of standing up and providing for their needs, and for their families' needs, and for their communities' needs. They see themselves their own mini superhero, and they're really, really excited to constantly light a fire under their other community members, metaphorically, and figure out the best way for them all to ignite, activate, and step up to their needs, to reach their needs. What does this look like? It looks like sanitation improvement. It looks like working with community leaders and helping them to be able to identify what their main sanitation challenges are. And then figuring out the best ways that they can organize their own defecation, or the best ways that they can keep their hands clean, or clean themselves before they cook. It looks like working with teachers and helping to empower teachers to become better at teaching their children to read, and helping them to have better skills at educating their pupils. It looks like working with community members and supporting them to figure out the best ways they can cook their food and light their homes. It looks like serving as a business mentor, where we work with somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur, and we support them in figuring out what they can do to be able to improve their business strategies, write a business plan, maybe even help them write a business plan so they can qualify from a microfinance organization to get a loan and change their lives forever. Agricultural development, working with farmers and encouraging them, helping them to better understand some of the principles of soil fertility and irrigation and enhanced agricultural production, and then figuring out what they can do with what they have to be able to make incremental steps in this direction. Now, this type of work, it doesn't shift things overnight. It's a longer and slower process. But what results is people that have more capacity to move forward. And it looks like women's empowerment, helping to teach women some of the critical issues that they need to know about how their bodies work, so they can take care of themselves better, they can make better choices, they can avoid diseases, and they can find themselves in a greater level of social equality. What am I saying? I think you guys get it. I'm saying that we, as an international development industry, are going to be able to do a better job of helping communities that have kids like Jacobia in them to be better at solving their own problems, so they can become empowered, so we can change lives, so we can save lives, so we can help to be able to radically transform thinking moving forward. And this is a human-centered model. In simplicity, what am I saying? I'm saying that in the human-centered model, we focus on developing people. And we say, how can we support people to have the information, capacities, skills, and connections so that they are more empowered to go out and get the things and stuff that they need. Because these people, and I know that you all know it, they're really smart. They're really capable. They're entrepreneurial. They're resourceful. The fact that they're even alive based upon the conditions that they live with speaks to their resilience and their entrepreneurial attitude and their fight and their struggle for survival. They're so capable to be able to step up and solve their own problems. It might look different than we would expect. It might be a massively simplified approach towards one that we would take. But it might just be the right incremental step that's going to facilitate their gradual and dynamic evolution as a community. What we're saying is basically an invitation to believe that we can actually end poverty by developing people. When we do it this way, it's kind of like planting a seed. And this seed is able to grow, and we can nourish it, it can germinate, people can improve their capacities, and it can go on its own to be able to reach its fullest maturity. So this is the notion of human-centered development. And I want you to ask yourself, how does this idea feel? What does it look like? What does it feel like to be able to look at our present model and figure out what could we possibly do to become even better at empowering people? What would happen if we were able to focus energy on training about these topics? And this is a little bit of where my story comes in. I spent several years living in different areas of Africa, really feeling more alive there than any other time in my life. I decided that I wanted to be a part of helping people to overcome their own poverty, and I made terrible decisions. I ran every type of unsustainable program that you might imagine for the first little bit, but I was able to learn from that, and I was able to see what works and what didn't work. And every time that something wouldn't work, we would aggressively, at the drawing board, I'd read 10 more books. I'd extract the best principles and notions that people that have been doing this for decades were saying. And there was a common thread. And the common thread was that what results in the most sustainable programs, the ones that last longest, or the ones with greatest impact, the ones that affect people the deepest, or the ones that reach the greatest scale, the ones that ultimately go on to affect the most people, are programs that focus on developing humans' capacities and then encouraging them to share those new innovative ideas with their fellow community members. And that's exactly what I did. I teach about disease prevention, sanitation improvement, I served as a business mentor, and I fulfilled many other roles within the realm of human capacity. And I committed to come down and teach students and train volunteers and how human-centered development really works. And my invitation for the last couple of years, and my invitation today, is for people to become a steward of human-centered development, to believe in it, to learn about it, to invest energy into better understanding it, and then to figure out the best ways that we can apply the principles of human-centered development into the work that we care so much about, and into the lives of the people who each of you care so much about. So that once we understand the principles of human-centered development, we can take them into the classrooms, we can take them into our school clubs, into our companies, into our churches, religious organizations, into our nonprofit organizations, into our international development programs, and most importantly, we can bring those principles to the communities that are living in extreme poverty today. In order to support people in becoming stewards of human-centered development, I've created an online video education training program. It's called Human-Centered Development 101. And all it is a series of videos on a membership website that people can go through. They can learn all about, through hours and hours of training, about 10 hours altogether. They can be able to answer questions and do some basic simulations. They can connect to other people that have similar passions. And they can ultimately become certified from our organization as a steward of human-centered development. And that's what I'd like to introduce you as the company that we're just creating. We're unrolling our first education product in November, and that is University Without Borders. For short, U Without Borders. And our first training program is Human-Centered Development 101, and we'll be making that live, hopefully around November 1st. If you'd like any more information about human-centered development, or the programs that we're creating, how that might benefit you and your chapters, feel free to contact me directly. And I really look forward to hopefully connecting with many of you one-on-one for the rest of this conference. Thank you very much.